Hey everyone, welcome to the KE Report and a company update from Aztec Minerals. I am chatting with Simon Dyakowski, President and CEO of Aztec. Company is traded on the TSX Venture Exchange under the symbol AZT and on the OTCQB under the symbol AZZTF. This is an exploration update as the company has just released some initial drill results from the ongoing drill program at the Tombstone Property in Arizona. I'm going to post figure one from the news release in the show notes so you can get a better understanding of where some of these drill holes were located that we are going to talk to. 5 RC drill holes were reported in yesterday's news release. Simon, let's first just look at this map and again explain to us the strategy of this year's drill program of further testing that southern extension, the discovery that was made last year. Where were these 5 holes located? Walk us through this map, please.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Corey. And we were very pleased to announce the first 5 RC holes of our program. I'll note that, really two of these holes, they're labeled TC in the sequence. So that stands for Tombstone Core. And what they are pre-collars where the casing's been left in the hole, and we're now going to be completing these holes with core down into our CRD target. So on this figure one map that we're looking at, there's a big magenta blob, and that's a representation of a resistivity low at about 600 meters depth. So you'll notice that those TC holes, while we reported the shallow results of them today, there's sort of a blue outline that continues down, which indicates, where they'll ultimately be testing down at depth underneath the contention system. So we actually still had pretty decent results shallow in those 2 holes, particularly TC01, which is sort of way out there to the southwest, and even that hit shallow, a nice zone of mineralization of 23 meters of almost 40 grams silver equivalent. So that's a good indication of some growth potential here to the southwest. Hole TR1, so the R stands for RC. TR1 was an exploration hole that didn't return meaningful gold or silver numbers, but it does confirm our suspicion that this contention system is sort of bending towards the southwest. And we have further evidence for that, obviously, in hole TC01 with some prospective results that are shallow there. TC02 is another one of these so-called pre-collars. Also intersected a decent run, approximately 62.5 meters of over 40 grams silver equivalent. And then the two most exciting holes for us were building on this southern extension zone discovery. To remind your listeners, the southern extension is an area that we haven't had an opportunity to aggressively drill yet just because of priorities in previous years being more to the north. So holes TR 2502 and 03 were placed about 50 meters north of our really compelling discovery hole last year that was called TR16. There's a lot of TRs being thrown around here, but I think you get the picture. And so this hole hit particularly 03, a nice wide zone just under the bottom of the pit floor, 50 meters of almost 90 grams silver equivalent. And within that, there was a nice 6-meter intersection that averaged about 450 grams silver equivalent. So really pleased with that result. And you can also see on this plan map that we have 5 other holes denoted in green, which are currently in the lab. We're waiting for the results. Expect to have those out over the next couple of weeks. And we are continuing to drill right now. The drill's been down for a couple of days here for some maintenance, but we anticipate by this weekend getting back up and running and drilling. We did announce 16 holes in about 3,200 meters. We're definitely going to drill at least that, maybe some more. And, I think you'll see now pretty good emphasis on the southern extension zone that doesn't have a ton of drilling in it. We think that is an area that could really grow the footprint here, potentially a couple holes out to the west side area further north. And more important, or maybe not more importantly, but very significantly, we now are for the first time as Aztec Minerals drilling deep core holes underneath the contention system. So 2 rigs on site right now, and this is pretty exciting. We will see what we find down deep.
All right, let's give a little bit more focus to those headline holes, the best holes there, the TR 03 and 02. '03 hit just over 6 meters of over 450 grams per ton silver equivalent. That was within a broader zone of 50 meters, averaging right around 90 grams per ton silver equivalent. You note that it's at a shallow depth. How does this result in this hole compared to that discovery hole from last year?
Well, it's got a nice width to it as well. We didn't quite hit as high of a grade in a couple of the core samples there in what's called the quartz feldspar porphyry dike, but we know that this structure really pinches and swells north south around the pit. So I wouldn't read into like anything regarding a lower grade. It's just this is an area that's relatively undrilled, and we need to drill a lot more in it. So this is really our start of it. We're currently modifying the program somewhat to focus in a little bit more in the southern extension zone. So I'm very curious to see how the rest of it turns out. We're drilling now at least, two angle holes off each setup, so a fan which covers more area. And I anticipate seeing more drilling in and around the area. One limiting factor, Corey, I should point out, is we have an excellent machine on site. It's what we need to be getting through old workings and tough ground conditions, but it does require a large platform. So although the plan map might look relatively flat, we're drilling off of roads that are carved into a hillside. So we can't just drill exactly where we want to. We have to be a little bit selective as to the location because there is a big drill that has to sit there, a compressor, a rod sloop, lots of trucks and personnel, and we have to make sure that it's safe and stable. So just to answer any questions that might come about, the order of what we've been drilling in, if there's anything to read into that, I wouldn't read into it beyond the fact that we need to make sure that we have good platforms built, and that requires heavy equipment and, safe and stable platforms.
So, Simon, just as a kind of recap of what you're trying to do here, especially in the southern extension, look, you mentioned hole TR01. That's at the very bottom of that map. That was a huge step out, way at the bottom of that southern extension zone. It really seems like you are trying to find the extents of this system, maybe even where some of the higher grade would be. Take us through what you really hope to accomplish this year's drilling just in the southern extension here.
Well, I want to get it a little bit more defined. The north end of the contention system, while it's still open to the west, you can see just in the pattern there that it's fairly well defined now. We have a good idea of the controls of the mineralization there. We don't have as good of that information to the south just by virtue of not having that grid drilling, kind of, we call it a fan grid pattern. So the idea here is to somewhat replicate the pattern that we have on the north end of the pit on the southern area, and to quote my VPX, see what we see. Not to be glib, but we do need to get more drill data in there. If you consider the totality of our drilling on the project, we've been chatting about it for years, but we have now drilled about 11,000 meters of RC. We've got an exceptionally high hit rate. Obviously the first hole this year was a miss in terms of metal content, and if you consider, the odd holes that we've now drilled to date, that's really the only second miss that we've had. So we're still really in a growth phase here. I know it's been a few years, but we'd like to just ramp up the volume of drilling at this point and continue to demonstrate growth to this system now, with more emphasis on the south.
Now, regarding these pre-collar holes, the TC holes, you mentioned that you did hit some mineralization high up on the holes. It's not even really the goal of these holes, but I guess a bonus aspect. Does that give you any more confidence or lead you to believe anything else about when you extend these holes to test out that CRD target?
Well, the entire area is essentially an oxidized system of mantos, right? Which is what we're hoping to find down deep with sulfide mineralization versus oxidized metal. So yes, it does give us encouragement that the holes are fairly well mineralized, shallow up. But I'll point out that the ultimate targets of these holes are several hundred meters down, 400 to 800 meters is sort of the horizon that we are testing. So while I'm excited that there is gold and silver mineralization shallow up in the hole, there's still a ways to go. We literally just started a couple days ago drilling these deeper holes. It'll be a number of weeks before we have any indication of the success of our model there, but it's still a very exciting target. I mean, many, many years in the making here to be drilling this geophysical target in the south of the property and confirming to the north around historic hole T8 drilled by Santa Fe Mining, which was a nice hit of 7 meters of around 10% metal content drilled in 89. So this is exciting. You know, don't want to speculate too much, obviously, in the geology based on the shallow parts of the hole, but we feel we're in the right type of rocks here to find some sulfides at depth.
Now, exactly how deep are you going to extend these holes, at least from TC01 and O2? And when do you think you will have those completed?
Ultimately, they should be extended between 600 and 800 meters. So, call it on average 800 meters total depth is the plan. Obviously, that is subject to change based off of, how things are going and what we're seeing. But that's the plan. Roughly 1,800 meters of total drilling. So, allocate that sort of 600 meters per hole. And we're already starting at, let's say, an average of 150 meters down the hole. So we'll get to 750, 850, somewhere in that neighborhood. In terms of the timing, we just started drilling, probably would want to wait a couple weeks before commenting on the timing. Really depends on how the bit performs through the various rock types. I think, we've got very skilled drillers, but before we start backing out or extrapolating any production rates, per shift, let's see how they do on the first few days. And, maybe on our next round of results, I'll have a more concrete answer on that. But, let's call the entire core drilling program 2-ish months, 2 to 3 months. That's how long it will take.
Simon, let's also look up to the north, more near the top of this map, that TC 2503. What are you drilling up here? What is this target that you have a star around?
Yeah, that target is the surface expression of the historic CRD intersection on our property. And so that was what I was referring to a couple minutes ago on the T8 intersection. So there's been some deep drilling in the Tombstone area, but nothing has really been underneath the contention system, except for one hole that undercut the north end of the pit, and it came in from the east and cut west at an angle, and at around that surface expression, there was a CRD style semi-massive sulfide intersection of what was reported to be 7 meters of around 9.1% lead, zinc, an ounce of silver, I think 0.6% copper, and a sniff of gold. So we are drilling hole TC03 from a steeper angle from the south to the north to try to confirm that mineralization and see, how it might connect up with the west side of the contention system and probably take it a little bit deeper than just that mineralization if we are to confirm it. So that's CRD style to the north, and then to the south is really where we have our strongest geophysical indication of a potential ore body.
So, Simon, just a quick comment on the share price action yesterday when the news dropped. The stock traded a very high volume, ended up on the day a couple cents, but almost 10% higher. Any insights on what happened there? Who was taking notice of this news? Because clearly somebody was, and there was a fair bit of buying that came in throughout the day.
Yeah, look, I think there's a lot of enthusiasm for the deep portion of the drilling. So I believe, that some investors that are intrigued by the prospect of a discovery down deep are starting to take a position now that we're actually drilling it. So I think that drove some of the interest. Also, there was a fund that had to liquidate a fairly sizable position over the last 2 months. It was about 4.5 million shares, and I did receive confirmation early yesterday that overhang is now lifted. They are out. This fund had to sell not due to any fundamental reasons in the company, but it is a fund that is primarily or now exclusively large cap precious metal names, and their investment policy has changed such that they can no longer hold illiquid stocks. So that's a little bit unfortunate to have lost them as a shareholder, but the overhang that their disposition created has now been confirmed to have lifted. So I think that's created a little bit of less pressure on the stock. We were trading, north of 25 cents when we started the drill program, and I think, now that we're starting to report results, the market is rewarding us once again here. So it was great to see that volume in that 10% increase, and we're hopeful to be producing more high-grade silver results and gold results over the coming weeks as we continue to drill both shallow, and then ultimately we are very intrigued to see what happens down deep.
So what does the news flow look like? Simply drill results coming in the near term, or anything else we should keep our eyes on?
I'd say drill results are the primary focus now going into the fall. We did have some interesting news on Tombstone a few weeks back that we increased our ownership of the project to 85%. So I think that is something to monitor, moving in the right direction in terms of ownership. But yeah, in terms of real meaningful news, let's keep looking for drill results over the next few weeks into September and probably into October, given that we just started core drilling in mid-August here.
All right, Simon, thanks for the update. I'll post a link to the company's website so you can read over the full news release. And again, that figure one, the map of where the drilling is, that will also be in the show notes. Please send me any follow-up questions you have for Simon. I'll get him to adjust those, and I will follow up when there are some more drill results. So, Simon, thank you very much for your time. Hope you have a great weekend.
Hey, you too. Thanks very much for having me on today.